Hello, everyone, and welcome
Welcome to
to
GatsbyConf.
GatsbyConf. How exciting! I cannot believe we are here. I cannot believe it's GatsbyConf today. I'm JD Peterson. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Gatsby, and this is my co-host, Lacey Texter, Gatsby's Senior Brand Marketing Manager. How you feeling today, Lacey?
Pumped, excited, ready for these announcements.
I guess the real question is, have you had your coffee yet?
I secured the coffee, yes.
Secured the coffee. There you go. And looking good with your Gatsby swag. Love to see that. Well, we're both really, really thrilled to be here with you all and welcome you to this second annual GatsbyConf.
Thanks, JD. Yep, that's right. We are here holding GatsbyConf exactly 1 year from the last GatsbyConf. And 2021 was a really busy, really big year for us here on the Gatsby team. We featured a lot of exciting product announcements and releases. So, friends, do me a favor. Drop your favorite new feature or anything that we released in 2021 in the chat. And right now, I'm going to see what I can remember. Let's see. We had Gatsby 3, of course, from GatsbyConf last year, and that included Gatsby Image plugin, hosting on Gatsby Cloud, and Gatsby Functions. And then we had Preview UI and Gatsby 4 only a few months later. That included parallel query running, deferred static generation, and server-side rendering. I'm not looking at the chat right now, but I am super curious to see what people are dropping in there, so I will definitely check it out later. And in between all of that, all of those bigger announcements, there were many, many speed and performance improvements happening in between. So, like I said, we never really slowed down. Now, following months and months of planning and prep, the whole Gatsby team is beyond excited to share the newest of the new happening here in the Gatsbyverse. I think you're going to be really psyched to hear about.
Whoa. Hold on, Lacey. Hold on. Before we jump in and give away all the announcements we're going to make throughout the day, it is possible, maybe not likely, but possible, that some people here, some of our viewers, are new to the community and may not have an understanding of what Gatsby is or who we are or why we're all here today. And we also might want to give people a quick little lay of the land in our event platform, Hoobalo.
Okay, fair enough. On that note, JD, I've got a challenge for you.
Ooh, I love a challenge.
In under 1 minute, can you tell everyone what Gatsby is and also what GatsbyConf is all about?
Oh, I think I could do that. You got your stopwatch ready?
Yep, let's go.
All right. Gatsby is the fastest front-end framework for the headless web. And in particular, if you're driving content from a CMS or an e-commerce platform, or maybe even multiple sources, Gatsby is a perfect fit to deliver you a highly performant website along with a great developer experience. All of this making it possible for you to drive more traffic to your website, convert users more efficiently, and grow your business. More revenue, yay. How much time do I have?
You're doing really good. 20 more seconds, go.
Okay, well, that was Gatsby. GatsbyConf, why we're here today, this is our chance to come together as a community, power in numbers, to share updates and announcements, and hear from some of the people who are building incredible websites with Gatsby, pushing the limits of the modern web and using Gatsby across a variety of industries and different types of use cases. And this year, thanks to all of our amazing sponsors, who, by the way, you should definitely check out today. There's a list of them, amazing companies. You should definitely check all them out today by stopping by their booths. And we're actually going to be raffling off prizes from some of these brands building their websites with Gatsby. How'd I do? Did we finish? Did I get under a minute?
Pretty impressive there. You came in maybe with a few seconds to spare.
It's just like Gatsby build times. I'm always trying to shave a few seconds and come right under.
Nice. All right, well, since you were so fast with all of that info, I'm going to give the quick, as you mentioned, lay of the land here on Hoobalo, just in case anyone's never used it. It's actually pretty straightforward. Up at the top, you'll see reception, agenda, sponsors, and sponsor booths, and sponsor lounge. Reception is where you can go to get a quick overview of everything happening in the event today. Agenda is where you're going to go to click whenever you're going to join a different talk session. And then you'll see sponsor booths, which is where you can go to check out all the new stuff that our sponsors are bringing. You can also live chat with them there. And then the sponsor lounge, if you're feeling, talkative today, you can go there and jump on camera or not, but you can actually talk with them in the sponsor lounges. So I know that was sort of a lot. It might take a couple minutes to sort of get used to things, but don't forget, if you get lost any time today, you can always go to the event chat and ask questions about where or when something is happening, and one of the Gatsby team members will jump in.
Yeah, and definitely stay involved in that chat. If you've got questions or you just want to tell us what you're excited about or anything that's on your mind, we love seeing the chats. We'll have various Gatsby folks involved there. But enough of this. They've probably seen enough of our faces by now, at least mine. And we've got a lot of great things to share today. So let's go ahead and get this show on the road and introduce our first speaker. You may know him from his website, CSS Tricks, or from CodePen, the playground for front-end web development. Or you might be familiar with his podcast that he co-founded called Shop Talk, which is a great, popular weekly podcast. Perhaps you've even picked up one of his 2 published books. But right now, it is my great honor on behalf of the entire Gatsby community to introduce him as our first GatsbyConf 2022 keynote speaker. Please join me. Big round of applause, big hand. Let's welcome to the stage with his talk. Love this title, by the way. Websites are good now. It's Chris Coyier.
Wow, righteous applause. Hold on, I should come up from under frame. There I am. Oh, hey, everybody. What's happening? Thanks for the intro, JD. Very kind, very kind. Is it just me now? Am I alone on stage dancing to myself? All I'm going to get back, I guess I should give my presentation then. I did work very hard on it. I'll share my screen and get it going. Home, play. How's that looking? Fantastic. My off-screen fairy has told me it's looking good. I want to talk about how websites are good now. Kind of a tongue-in-cheek title, but that's all cool. We're gonna, as I reflected upon this, I mean, I came up with the idea because I'm like, wow, there's so many things that are just easier and better about websites. What are they all? The idea is that I'm just gonna do like a little sprinkling of them. There's our little yellow on-screen fairy, and the fairy I sprinkled in the presentation because I wanted to put it at little points where I'm like, that's why the web is better. So look out for the little fairy. This is not a comprehensive list of things that are better about the web. There's just some stuff that is better and I think is just cool and interesting. And I smattered them all together in this. We're going to look at, first, we'll look at web typography. It's good now. Did you know that? We're going to look at how to handle images. It's good now. Layout, super good now. Building with components, a conceptual concept I like to drive home. Beautiful. Love it. Animation stuff has gotten super good now on the web, and the deal with hosting and CDNs and the edge, the coolest word in tech right now. Amazing stuff. That's kind of the plan for now. So let's just get into it. I wanted to, have a rug to tie the talk together, something that I could build a website. I could use all this stuff the best I can in it. So for science reasons also, I went into my town of Bend, Oregon, and I got every single breakfast burrito that anyone sold, and I rated them, and I built a website rating breakfast burritos. So if you don't live in Bend, Oregon, it's probably not that interesting to you, but I built a website just for this. And so we'll be referencing the build of that website as we're looking at how the web has gotten better. Okay, so good, like the web's gotten better. The web is good now. When was the web bad or whatever? What do I mean by that? Let's just call it, even in the last few years, the web has gotten a lot better. Definitely 5 years, but just for fun, let's roll back the clock 20 years and see kind of what was going on in the web. Is the web better than it was 20 years ago? Well, I work with this dude, Robert, and we were just out to lunch chatting. He worked at this company called iAmaze, and this is circa the year 2000, so 22 years ago, I guess. And they made this was like their flagship thing, was this online slide presentation builder app. Pretty cool, right? This was before, CSS, HTML, JavaScript were really bad back. There was no Ajax back then, you know, or Fetch or whatever. But they made a slide builder and viewer, and it was like really cool. And they were pushing the limits of what the web could do. And then they sold that company for $60 million to AOL. So like, there's probably people listening to this presentation right now that could scaffold out in Gatsby probably a slide app in like before the end of the day, you know. So the web is, I'd say, markedly different than it was 20 years ago. Let's get started on my list though. Web typography, gotten a lot better recently, I'd say. Here's just like a collection of little things. And by the way, that title, web typography, that was set in web type, believe it or not. There's links to relevant code pens throughout the article. If you know, the PDF is going to drop right after this, I think. So here I am chilling on typography Twitter, see a new font drop middle of the last year. It's called MD Primer from a little font foundry called Mass Driver, and I really liked it. It's just one of those, you see the font, you're like, oh, I really like it. Like I really, really like it. It's serious, but not too serious. It's got big bolds. It's very readable. I love it. I want to use it. I end up using it as the heading font, you know, on CSS Tricks. So that was great. But usually I'm so disheartened when I look at fonts like this. I'm like, oh, it's from a great foundry. It's probably going to cost like literally like tens of thousands of dollars usually to use on the web when you find a really nice font sometimes. But I look at their license, and this foundry is known for changing up how you know, online web font licenses are, and they charge based on how many people work at the company, which in CSS Tricks case, even when you factor in part-timers and stuff, is like me and two other fellows pretty much. So I was like, wow, that's great. That seems so fair. And it's a license in perpetuity. They don't charge extra for web fonts like so many people do. I was so happy to see this evolution of web licensing happen. So I end up, you know, paying a really fair price for the font, and I use it. And then you download it, and what do you get? Well, you get these like OTF files. That's cool. Open type. That means I can use it locally. Like I could make my VS Code use this font if I wanted to, but more crucially, I'm going to design with it so I can use it in Sketch and Figma and all that stuff. And then all the web type ones, it came with WAF and WAF2. And I'm like, huh, that's pretty bold, you know, like, isn't it? I come from this era in CSS where there's like, you need like 5 or 6 formats to make web fonts work across all browsers if you're self-hosting them. And I was like, I should look into that. It's been a while since I've looked into that. It's just not true anymore. Really, all you need is WAF2 these days. That format, all you do is link it up in an @font face declaration in CSS, that one format, you know, and it has a font family, and then you use it. That's how good the web platform has gotten. You really don't need it unless your own data is pointing at you needing IE11 support. Then you separate that source property value and add the WAF1, just the WAF file, and you can use that too. I just think that's a little tiny example of how the web has gotten better. It's just so easy to use that font face these days. It used to be this big complicated thing with all this crap you had to think about. Speaking of things you had to think about when you self-hosted your own typography files, I ended up using it on the Burrito site, of course, and in this presentation, because why not? Was that there was a risk that something would screw up, like your CDN would bork or whatever, and the font file would never load. And then sometimes it would take a long time for type to show up on your site, or worst case scenario, it wouldn't at all, which is such an unacceptable fail state for a website. At least this was in my mind, as this is what happens when fonts fail kind of thing. And I've just been nervous about it forever because it's such a terrible place to be. So CSS gets involved here and totally solves this problem. That line with our little fairy down there is pointing at it. And this is CSS saying, fine, developers, you don't like this default behavior. I'm going to give you all the control of it. I'm going to say, if the font doesn't, you know, what the swap does is says, I'm not going to wait for very long to display type. If this font doesn't arrive super, super fast, I'm just going to display the fallback font, some font that's already on your computer that will show the type. And then when it does load, I'll swap it out. So you'll see a little jank, but at least you're never in the position where the typography doesn't load on a website, which is the worst thing that could happen. Then there's that optional value too. I almost like it even better because it kind of prevents that flash of unstyled text thing that says, hey, you know, if the font what it says is I'm going to display the fallback font pretty much right away. And then on the next page load, because it'll be loaded in cache, then I'll show the font. So it lowers FOUT. It's just another option, but that's CSS. That's the web platform getting involved, making the web better and saying, let's give you control. And now this is supported everywhere too. It works even in Google Fonts, it's amazing. Another concept I really like and that's awesome on the web lately is this concept of fluid type, which means rather than setting the font size to something on a website that's just like, oh, here it is, it's 16 pixels or whatever, that you give it this expression of how big you want it to be. And it's fluid depending on what's happening on the page. So take a look at this video. Look with your eyes at the word fluid type at the top while the video plays. You can see that as the video gets smaller, that fluid type at the top, it just resizes just a little bit, depending on what's happening and how wide the browser window is. I didn't have to express anything there. I didn't have to say, oh, well, at mobile size, then rejigger the font size to be smaller. It just did that automatically because I have an expression of how big that type should be. It's a great concept. We've been able to do it for quite a while, but it used to be pretty darn complicated. And it's gotten a lot easier to the point where now I think it's just like amazing. And it's just the way we should do type on the web. Check out this resource, fluid-type-scale.com. It asks you some questions. Don't worry too much about that until you get into it. And then you might want to answer those questions. But it gives you this chunk of CSS. Let me just move it over here so it's easier to see. Those things with 2 dashes in front of them in the CSS are CSS custom properties. It's kind of our chance to, in this case, set up some design tokens that then as soon as they're set up in the rest of any CSS that's applied to the page. I can just use these font sizes like variables that are set up. That's what I mean by easy. I can just use this anywhere in my whole, that way my website will respond to what's happening on it and all the type will be sized in this fancy fluid way. Then the rest of the magic is handled by that clamp function. It takes 3 arguments like a JavaScript function, What it tries to do is that middle argument, the one with a plus in it, and see that number VW, that means a percentage of how wide the browser window is. So it tries to make the final value based on that expression, which just sprinkles in a little bit of how wide the browser window is. It's not purely based on that because it can be a little too dramatic. It just sprinkles it in a little bit. But then what clamp does, it says, but don't be any smaller than this and don't be any bigger than this. So it gives you these safeguards so that type doesn't kind of go nuts on you. Anyway, this is the setup for fluid type and it's so cool. I put it like, put your eyes on active culture right now. You can kind of see it resize a bit as the browser window goes down and it's great. So now I don't, it's so easy to do this. I just say, oh, it's an H2, just make it, I don't know, font size XL, and then I'm done. That's the only font sizing I'll ever have to do on this website because it's using this kind of formula to set it. So that's just some ways that web typography have gotten so much better even in the last few years. So cool. I didn't even mention variable fonts, which is a huge thing. Here's a little demo of how that can work. It's one font file that has vector information in it that can, it doesn't have to be animated, but the point is you have programmatic control of like, how bold do I want it to be? How italic do I want it to be? And people have done really weird things. It's not just bold and italic, it's anything that you can do with vector art. It's just worth checking out. Google it, variable fonts, so cool. Moving on to image handling. This is huge on the web because the web is just saturated in images. They're everywhere. Like typography, every website has them for the most part. And it's been traditionally a very simple thing to do on the web. You have an IMG tag, you put a source in it, and there's an image shows up. It's like the easiest thing in the world on the web, but the web's changed a lot. You might be looking at this website on a freaking website that's 2 inches wide because it's this tiny little phone, or a giant monitor that's 2 feet wide. It's starting to be unacceptable to just put one source of an image. You have to give multiple so that the browser can pick the most appropriate one because it's the most responsible thing to do for performance. And you have to teach it about that. And you have to take advantages of these new formats because things like WebP and AVIF format are just miles better than previous formats. If you're not taking advantage of that, you're just throwing performance in the toilet. You got to be serving these images from CDNs that are built to be serving them, again, because it's just so much faster. It's just notably better for performance, and you have to optimize them, and you have to worry about lazy loading them, which gotten easier, but you still have to think about the laundry list of images, and this isn't even complete, is super long. It's not just put an image with the source tag anymore. There's lots of stuff that you have to do. So, but here's what's crucial about this. If it's too hard to do, I'm not going to do it, and you're not going to do it. We're just not, that's just the world. You need things to help you make this easy. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. So this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to buy a freaking burrito, put it on a plate so I can take a picture of it, take this nice picture of it, and be done. I don't want to think about all the rest of that stuff. I'm willing to do some coding and some prep work, but I don't want the process to be hard. So this camera outputs this ridiculously large, like 5 megabyte image of a burrito, and I just freaking commit it to Git, which I'm sure is just abhorrent to a lot of people here. You're like, oh my God, putting images in your Git anyway isn't ideal, but anyway, so whatever. It's not like I'm going to serve it as 5 megabytes. I'm not nuts, but I don't, that's what I want the workflow to be. Snap, upload, who cares, So let's solve that whole list of stuff, but we're going to do it at the URL level. I'm going to be using an app called Cloudinary to do it, but it's the concept that's important, and lots of different companies do it. I'm picking one that works pretty well here. So that's the whole URL. I'll go back one. This solves like almost everything on that list amazingly, just at the URL level. I'm going to use Cloudinary here. That solves the cookieless global CDN situation. They're the image host in this case. Way at the end of the URL, I'm going to put another URL. Did you know URLs could have URLs in them? Of course they can, That's the canonical location of the image, meaning if all the rest of that URL went away, this would still be where the actual image is hosted. So that's there. We're not locked into anything here. And then there's some stuff in the middle of the URL that says, serve it in the best possible format. So I don't have to do anything. I just put that little piece in the URL, and the right browser gets the right format. Amazing. It's automatically optimized way better than I could ever pull it off, because they're incentivized to do that, make it amazing. And I can say how big, how wide do I want it to be? Meaning I could just duplicate this URL 10 times with different widths, and it'll give me 10 different images at different sizes, which unlocks that source set ability that HTML has now. Don't worry too much about this, but this was my way of templating this out locally on my project. Says, am I in development? If I'm in development, don't do all this fancy stuff. Just link to the image. If I'm in staging or production, I need to craft that URL, because at the bottom, underneath the fairy there, you can say that source set attribute, it needs differently sized images. It needs to know how big they are. So this is just a little JavaScript templating code that got me to what I want as the output in the HTML. I had to write this once, and then my workflow is set forever. It manifests in the DOM as this big chunk of HTML that has all these URLs and stuff in it, but it's exactly what I want. It's the most performant possible stuff. It's not a 5 megabyte image. These are little baby optimized, CDN hosted, lazy loaded, perfect little images. And I just had to write that code once, which is kind of great. It's not just Cloudinary that does that. Other image hosts can do this. The concept that I think is vital with all this. And notably, Gatsby has been solving this for a long time. So if you're a Gatsby developer and you're watching this, you're like, yeah, but I use the Gatsby thing. Just keep using the Gatsby thing. Gatsby was an early player in making images super good on the web. This is a great plugin from them. If that's what you're using, it also is solving all this stuff. I just like that you understand what's happening kind of behind the scenes. What's the ideal kind of DOM output for images? So cool. Again, not the complete list of stuff. There's like a 1,000-page book from Adi Osmani on images that I think it's funny that exists, because images are so freaking complicated today, but that's just a good resource. I want to talk about layout. This is a fun one. This has got really good on the web. Okay, here, there's stuff like Flexbox and Grid you're probably aware of, but there's new stuff. Let's talk about it all. Here's an amazing layout that we might want to do on the web. This is the burrito site. I've taken some of the content out so you can see more of the grid. There's a 3-column grid, but it breaks to a 2-column grid. It breaks to a 1-column grid, and it's not just that direction. If I have more space, I get more columns. I can go up to a 5-column grid. It's amazing what this can do. What do I have to do? Do I have to write 5 different breakpoints to make that happen? Is it fragile? Is it complicated? Is it hard to understand? How does it work these days on the web? Nope, it's a one-liner. I use CSS Grid. I say the columns that I've set up for this grid, repeat as many of them as you can possibly fit. make them about 360 pixels wide or bigger until you get to the point where another one could fit, and then put another one there. And that little min expression says, well, if the browser window is super narrow, like 320 pixels, don't force it to be 360. Just let it be as wide as the browser window. It's a little much to wrap your head around, but that's a one-liner that expresses that entire layout. That is a huge jump in the web platform's ability to do layout on the web. It's amazing. I'm going to add another line, that one. You'd normally think of grids as like a tic-tac-toe board where there's lines for the columns and there's lines for the rows too. When it breaks down into another row, it starts at this horizontal line. Masonry is that famously like Pinterest style layout where it looks like this staggered brick wall of stuff going on there. We'll just take a look at it. Here's this grid. And as I scroll down, you'll see it's not a tic-tac-toe board. The rows are staggered like that. Masonry says, I don't care where the rows break. And what's important about this is that it's not like placing the cards vertically and then it breaks to another row and has them. It still maintains this left to right source order. Like as you tab through this, it's going to attempt to follow like a row-like structure, which is important for accessibility. And that's what makes Masonry layout so hard. But isn't that beautiful? It doesn't matter how many columns there are in anything. It gets this staggered approach for a one-liner in CSS. Incredible. Let's not do that though. We can keep Masonry, but I'm going to keep a 2-column grid only. And then at a certain media query, I'll make it 1 column. So it's just going to be this. That's what we're going to do for the production website. But the reason I'm going to do that is because what I want to do here is when the card itself, when one review of a burrito itself has enough room, I want to rejigger that card to take advantage of that room. I don't want to just slap another column on there. I want to design the card, but only in certain circumstances. And that's what container queries are all about. New stuff in CSS, really only shipping in Chrome Canary at the moment, but there's lots of exciting stuff. It's moving in browsers. There's lots of momentum here. So it behooves you to pay attention here. So let's say I have that orange thing is a component and it needs to be styled under certain circumstances. All the tools we have now are media queries, which are based on the size of the entire browser window, those blue lines. Component queries says, you can make styling decisions based on the size of the container itself. I feel like when I say that, it's so obvious. It's like, yes, of course, that's how you would make styling decisions. Why didn't that exist since the beginning of time? Well, it just didn't. And the answer is really complicated there. Probably the most important thing that's happened to CSS, like since media queries, super important stuff here. This is how it plays out. You're going to need a container query, thing above it that you query. The important part here is that you can't style the thing that you query. So you kind of need a container of some kind. Sure, fine. Then that container, you select it and say, that's the container. It's containing the inline size, essentially the width of it. Then you give it a name, in this case, card wrap. Then you have this opportunity like a media query to say, when the thing is a minimum width of 700 pixels in this case, I can style any child of it. That is a huge opportunity in CSS, probably the most important thing that's happened in CSS in a long time. Very, very cool. Here's how this plays out. See that's the standard layout in two columns. As it gets a little wider, it's going to go boop and make a whole new layout. Interesting, right? And now as I get narrower, it's going to pop back to the old one. But when it goes down to 1 column, look, there's room again to do the other layout. Nice. So it smashes back together. So these cards, they don't care about the entire width of the browser window. They only care about themselves, which is, sounds selfish, I guess, but it's an amazing opportunity in CSS. This is just a chunk of code that says, hey, under these circumstances, totally redo the layout in a totally special way. It's a wonderful thing. So maybe you've heard of container queries. Can you use them? You kind of can. This is how the polyfill works. You test if it's supported or not, which is a one-liner, super easy. If it's not supported, you load this polyfill that comes from Google themselves, who are working on the first implementation of it. That's it. And then it just starts to work. You write spec compliant CSS and it just goes. Really cool. Unfortunately, due to the nature of how browsers work, usually there's like a paint that happens with HTML and CSS, and JavaScript tends to load later. That can have some, remember we talked about FOUT, there's, flash of unstyled content. It's possible that your page loads, then this JavaScript loads and it reshuffles how things are. Kind of an undesirable experience, but if you can exert some control over that, like you have a client rendered website like you could probably do in Gatsby, hey, maybe it's fine. It's just something to think about. It's not 100% perfect, but it's pretty close. And if you really, really love the idea of container queries, there's a good possibility you can just start writing them right now. Yeah, sweet. So maybe you've heard of container queries, but let's look at container units too, just as cool, I think. Remember that approach with the clamping and the sizing, and that we did it based on the viewport width? That's still really cool, and you can probably get away with using a lot of that on the website, but it's possible that you might want to style something like font size based on the container, not the entire browser window. So this is from Mr. Shadid's article about that. He's like, well, even if we have container queries, it's still pretty verbose. Style the font size at all these different container queries. But what if we had, in that case, what is a Q? There's this thing over it. There's a container unit there, the container width that's clamping the size of that, meaning we can express something like font size or width or padding or whatever as a percentage of the width of the thing. And there's a whole bunch of them. QI is probably the most interesting one to me. It's the inline size rather than width, just so you're set up logically in case the direction of the document shifts or whatever. Really powerful stuff, though. Look at this demo by Scott Kellum. Look at that where it says Nike Free Metcon 4. That font size really should be sized based on the container, because there's a breakpoint here in which it actually gets bigger as the screen gets smaller. So check this out. Those font sizes are based on the container, which is really cool. See, there's that moment where it actually gets bigger and then the font gets bigger to match. Really a beautiful demo and shows off why you need that stuff. Okay, cool. This is you right now, because that's the most amazing thing that's ever happened in CSS, if you ask me. Let's talk about components conceptually. Totally new thing. Now we're not talking about the web platform anymore. We're just talking about a concept that I think is important, is that it's kind of the right primitive of what a website is, And I'm just talking about the ability of writing code that says, I need this component and now I'm going to use it, and I can pass along information to that component as I need it. If we look at CodePen itself, you could express this whole website, and we have, of course, as componentry. And I would wager you could go to any website, look at it and be like, that's a component, that's a component, that's something. You could break it down together as componentry. So here's an idea. We call that the item component on CodePen. There's a preview component and a user avatar component and a username component. So great. It's a very nice way to build stuff that says, okay, we're going to style these things individually. They're going to ask for their own data. We're going to piece them together however we need to. They're easy to update. It's just an amazing way to build it. Why is it so good though? It's changed the game. It's for example, human being wise, it's got developers talking to designers better. For an example, every design system on earth, which is so hot right now, designers think in design systems. So if you can say, hey, they're building componentry and they're designing and thinking about it that way, and we as developers are building with components in that way, that has bred some synchronicity between human beings that's been clutch, and it works, with developers too. If there's a backend developer and they're building some admin UI and they're like, oh, what do you use for a drop-down component? You use the drop-down component, and they're like, oh, cool, thanks. There's that stuff works pretty well. And I even think the entire existence of GraphQL, which Gatsby has famously adopted in a big way, is based on the idea of components. I have a component, it needs a little bit of data, so it asks for that bit of data that it needs. It's a beautiful, beautiful concept. I come at it from the front end development, wheelhouse mostly. And I love the idea how the idea of thinking in components makes me work faster. It isolates things in this way that makes things easy to reason about. It makes them easy to throw away. It scopes styles in a way that makes the web feel like less dangerous to work on, even when you're working at scale. It allows the browser to only load the things that it needs to load. It's just a conceptually great idea. And I'm talking to a room of Gatsby developers. You've already get this. Like the second thing, basically the first piece of documentation after the Gatsby concepts overview is building in components. Like Gatsby wants you to understand this. React wants you to understand this. It's kind of a big conceptual deal. And I think it's notable that JavaScript is what brought this to the party. Every other JavaScript framework agrees on this too. As different as they all are, they're all like, yeah, but components, that's the thing. And somehow weirdly, like other languages haven't gotten on board as much. I just think it's kind of a notable thing. I also think it's like, let's say you have a shop and all you do is build Gatsby sites for people. That's awesome. And you are trying to hire and somebody's like, I've only built Nuxt sites. They'll be up to speed in no time because conceptually it's the same programming model. It's like, you build stuff in components, it's fine. I think the web is better for this in a way. This is an example of the burrito site where I'm just like, it pulls the components it needs, it queries for the data it needs, it has the template it needs, it scopes the styles to the thing. It was a beautiful kind of way to build the site. All right, cooking along here. I have so much to show you. I love it. Let's talk about animation on the web just a little bit. Here's just a sprinkling of things that I think are cool. First of all, did you know that JavaScript has an API just natively built into it for animating? I feel like I talk to a lot of people that are like, what? It does? Yeah, you have a reference to an element, you call animate on it. You pass it an array of style things and it iterates through them like keyframes in CSS. I just think that's cool and you should know that. That's all. Scroll timelines are brand new in CSS. Look at this demo from Bramus Van Dam. You scroll down and then it's like, oh, fancy alert. It's going to scroll the other way now. And then it scrolls down. I'm sure people also, speaking of things some people find abhorrent, sometimes scroll jacking like this is a problem, but we know it happens a lot on the web and it can be kind of cool for those award style websites and all that. That is entirely expressed in CSS now. That should blow your mind a little bit, but that's possible. Just think you should know about it. There's a thing in CSS called offset path. Look at how cool this is. I can describe not only how I want something to move, but the path on which it moves on. Look at that little whoop, whoop. How cool is that? I just feel like not enough people know that you can describe the path on which motion happens on the web. Relatively new thing. It's just an example of the web getting better. Let's talk about another thing though, just this concept of flip, which is just a concept. It's not necessarily technology, although we're going to use a library to help. A way to think about it is just tweening DOM elements. Take a DOM element, move it, do whatever you want to it, and the flip concept will tween it between those two states in the most performant possible way. Here's an example on the burrito site. That big image at the top, it can't get much bigger than that portrait on a phone. So I'm not that worried about it. But those smaller images, there should be a way to get bigger than that. So let's just say, okay, here's what I want to do. If you tap on it, it just moves it to the bigger spot. If you tap it again, it just rotates these images in place. So if I do that in JavaScript, here's the HTML, just 3 images sitting in the DOM, but notice the state1 class there. I'm going to rotate that. State 1, state 2, state 3. So and this is the layout in CSS. I'm using CSS grid again to bring it all together. I've used the little ASCII art version of that. That's literally valid CSS syntax. And then when the state changes, it takes the images and it plops it into a different place on that grid. So it rotates it based on the state. And then when you click on one of those images, it rips off state 1, puts on state 2, rips off state 2, puts on state 3. Fairly verbose code there. I have a lot of different examples of how you could write that more succinctly, but whatever. So this is what happens then. Click on the image, it moves the positions of the images. That's it. So we've kind of solved what we wanted to do. But if we apply this concept of flipping to it, we'll use the green sock library for flipping here. It's a very easy to use library that says, save the state of those DOM elements, then do whatever you want to the DOM, make styling changes, go nuts with your CSS, whatever, then call flip and it will tween between the two positions. And I'm just saying, well, only do it though if users haven't indicated that they don't like motion, or they would prefer that there's reduced motion on the website, which people with vestibular orders or for any reason don't want sometimes. So a little bit of accessibility control there. And now look what happens if you don't have that in place. You get this rotation of that. And that's so beautiful because I don't have to express where, why, how to move those things. They just move because I moved them in the DOM and then I flip them so they move. Pretty compelling little thing. Here's another demo that zorks these little pink things down to the cart there. It doesn't matter where the pink cards are, and it doesn't matter where the checkout screen is. They will tween to each other. That's the compelling part about Flip. So we're going to end here with this concept of website hosting in the edge and how much those things have gotten better in the last few years. So cool. Particularly around the idea of hosting that has at its core static files, which is kind of the concept of Jamstack, I guess, which I would argue Gatsby is a part of. not the answer for every website in the world, but it's starting to be an answer for a lot of websites. And it's notable that the developer experience around this world has gotten so good. Again, just static hosting at the root, and then anything else you do is JavaScript and services above that level. Why is it good? Because the web performance of static files hosted on a CDN or the edge is literally as fast as the internet can possibly be. So pretty cool. Good, nice place to start there, I'd say. And that what Git is just a ball of static files. And what static file hosting is a ball of static files. There's like a one-to-one relationship with what's happening in Git now. And I think that's cool that you can take what's happening in a Git commit or a PR or whatever, a branch, and just make a URL out of it that's that website, meaning you can preview it really easily. You can run your CI/CD against it. It's just like components are. This is like the right model for building and hosting websites, I think. If it's just static files on a CDN, security, that's a nice little benefit. There's nothing to mess with that. So that's cool. Of all the sites that I work on, I have like various, all kinds of sites, and some of them have really like kind of exotic, complex dev environments. But any Jamstack site I work on, you do my Gatsby site, you just go, npm install, npm run dev. Okay, there's the site. I think that DX vibe of this Jamstack world has gotten pretty good. And then it turns out there's so many companies fighting for all this that the price of hosting these things is ridiculously cheap. I always like to high five Heroku in the beginning because I feel like in the past, they're the company that unlocked the coolness of like deploying from Git and deploying from a CLI. And then, old school, which is still a relevant thing today, GitHub Pages exists, which was like, hey, y'all, if you just like tell us which branch, we'll just like make that branch or a folder in that branch your website if you want. And lots of developers took advantage of that, and it got them thinking about like, wow, I can just make static files like my whole website. But GitHub Pages didn't really like run your build process, at least if it wasn't Jekyll, and it wasn't very advanced. It still isn't that advanced. And along come these players like Netlify and Vercel that are like, we're going to double down on this. We're going to make Jamstack a thing. We're going to like, make the DX of working on these websites like amazing, right? And they have, and they're around, they're doing great and all that. And then I think the big clouds show up. They're like, holy crap, where's the wind blowing? It's blowing towards this. So we better get on board, and you see Google offering products and Microsoft and Amazon saying like, we need to have stuff that's like this, that supports this world. These are a grain of sand compared to these. And so it's interesting to see everybody kind of duke it out, which is just only good for us, I'll tell you. And there's all these new players too. Cloudflare is a compelling product. DigitalOcean has a super cool platform thing, and other products that are like getting involved in this world of Jamstack hosting, essentially. That's just good for us. But I'm going to end talking about just the concept of the edge in general, just that CDN thing, which is changing as well. Because you think it as just like this cheesy diagram of how CDNs work. There's like, there's data centers all over the world, and the assets are requested from those data centers. Yeah, but it's not really always that complicated. So here's me up in obviously the Canadian Yukon, where I don't live, but wish I did. And here's Paul Hogan, RIP, in Australia, right? If we both need to ask a website and it's built entirely from static files, we both get it from the data center that's in our backyard, and it's amazing, and all the nodes have it. That's great. But the web is changing a little bit in that there's dynamic stuff that I'd argue that's what Jamstack means, is less about just only static stuff and more about pulling content from APIs and stuff, like Gatsby is so good at. So cool. There's this shell website. Maybe that's statically hosted, but the content it pulls from an API is probably still from a single origin server. So now you're like, yeah, you're on a CDN, but like some of your site's on a CDN and some of it's coming from an origin server. Fine. It's not the end of the world. Fine. It's how the web's mostly worked for a long time. But it's like, what could we do here that's cool? And one solution that's evolving is like, maybe we can start moving data out to the edge too. If that's the case, well, great. But that, it's getting a little more complicated. There's if you're Facebook, you're multi-region already. If you double down on like Cloudflare KV, whatever, then maybe your data's already at the edge. But that involves a little re-architecture and can be complicated. It's not as easy of a story. I think an easier story, I just think this is cool, is like, have the edge network itself go get that content, not the browser, Don't load the page and have the browser go to that origin server, get it. Be like, oh, I know what's happening here. This page needs dynamic content from an origin server. So I'm going to make the edge get it itself before it even returns the page. I think this is changing, and I think it's cool. I've only done this once, but I have had it in production for years. I have a Cloudflare worker that like it's JavaScript code that executes at the edge, and it says, oh, I see there's some HTML coming through me. I need to, this applies to me. So I'm going to go ask for some content out on the web, and I'm going to transform the HTML before it even arrives in the browser that already has the content from that API inside it, which is so cool. It's so much faster and better than having your browser do it. And I think it's gonna, like, we're at the beginning of a revolution where it's like the website it might be arrived totally static, like server-side rendering, which Gatsby absolutely supports, has famously that little Gatsby-SSR file or whatever it is, that it says, how do I want this to handle? Who do I want to talk to? Some data will be pre-built. Some will happen during the build process, and some of it you could even have happen as these edge functions, which is great. So yeah, Gatsby totally supports this concept, and I think it's cool. So wrapping up, websites, they're good now. What a stupid, cheesy title. I meant to be tongue-in-cheek when I came up with that. I just wanted to just rapid fire, show you cool ways that I think the web is getting better. But I was kind of being silly on purpose there a little bit, just to have fun, just to celebrate wins of the web, just to be like, hey, the web's fun, yay. But like, I'm a little serious in that the web was good anyway. Like the web is just a good place to build websites. It's, the URLs alone are just such an amazing concept that humans have invented that we get to lean on using the web. And the fact that we don't have to build things cross-platform, and the way that it's indexed and searchable by the web is just great. And I love seeing it get better. And I hope it gets a lot better over time, but it's already the right choice. And I just think that's good. And all of us building websites, we're doing it right. We're doing a good job. It's our job not to screw it up. So let's not screw it up and enjoy the rest of the conference. I think Dustin's up next. So thanks. I think we're going to do a little Q&A too, though. But cheers, y'all.
Indeed, we are going to do a little bit of Q&A with a few minutes we got here. But Chris, let me thank you for that keynote. That was incredible. And the crowd really, really loved it. You brought the energy, had some fun, a lot of informative stuff. Great job, by the way, crowd, in the chat with the animated GIFs. Love seeing that going. Before I ask you questions, though, quick note to my own event team. We got to schedule Chris right before a lunch break next time, because, man, he made me hungry with all these burrito shots. And yes. At some point, we're going to find out from you what that actual best burrito spot is in Bend, Oregon.
Oh, that's the question I got when I was practicing this for a small group too. I do have some answers.
Go ahead and tell us. I know my friend Jess, who works with us, she lives in Bend. She needs to know, what is the best breakfast burrito?
Oh, well, I'm going to shout out to Lucy's then. I think they do a wonderful job. But Los Jalapenos does great. Bend Breakfast Burrito is also a tremendous player. So all three of those are great choices.
Write those down, everybody.
Write those down. Next time you're in Central Oregon, everybody, hit those up. So I did want to ask you a couple questions, and we got some. I was furiously scribbling here from the crowd. One is that, and you kind of talked there, how the web is already a pretty great place, right? And we already have a lot of things. There's been a lot of advancements that made it better. Is there one thing, though, that still is harder than it should be in your mind, or that could take us from good to even greater with the web?
Oh, that's a super good question. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think it's almost like gatekeepers sometimes are a problem, or at least have the key to a solution, right? If every single browser maker said, here's all the APIs that I know that it takes to build great web apps, and we're going to run them and treat them as the same first-class citizens as apps written, quote unquote, natively on that platform, that would take the web to a totally different level. If everybody involved, Google, all the FANG or whatever it is, everybody agreed the web is a first-class target for everybody, and that's the language that we want you to build for, and here's every API you need, and every possibility is unlocked for you. Because there's this tension between what's available to the web and what's available to native apps, and what's allowed in app stores and what's not allowed in app stores, and what browsers allowed where and what browsers not allowed where. That's just like this eternal fight that I wish would just go away.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. That definitely resonates, I'm sure, with a lot of the crowd. Um, Bit of a technical question here from Jana from our crowd. I'm going to look over to my chat window here. Fonts, images, CSS, animations have gotten so much better now, but I have to webpack my NPN Babel to even see my site. Do you think the build chain complexity trade-off has actually been worth it?
Ooh, that's impossible to answer. Because you sometimes you buy a lot with a complex build chain. You get DX that's just incredible, it's hot module reloading beauty and the ability to tap into this ecosystem of pre-built stuff that's just amazing. What you buy from that is usually pretty great, and what you pay for that sometimes can be in the cost of excluding people that don't understand it as well, and a fragility over time that there's a chance that things start to break down. There's security concerns. It's just a trade-off. It's just one of those scales of how far am I willing to dig into this crazy build chain stuff, and how much do I want to back off from it because I'm worried about it, and I don't have the perfect answer for you.
Yeah, and something Gatsby's constantly trying to tackle ourselves and see where we can trim off some of that build tax for sure. I'm going to do one more from the crowd, and then Lacey will kind of wrap it up here because I know we're getting to the time. But Stu from out in our audience was wondering, what can or should we do as developers to be more aware of accessibility?
Well, you're already on the right track by asking yourself that question. You know what I mean? That means you at least care a little bit, which is just so far above the normal bar of where most people are at. Some people are actively hostile to it. So like
Yeah,
just not being, let's start with not being actively hostile to it. That would be cool.
Good first
And
step.
then, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and then there's some tooling that just not enough people use. I think of stuff like Axe Dev Tools, where it's just like, dude, it's a freaking Chrome extension for or other platforms too. It's in Dev Tools, and you click a button and it runs an audit on your website and tells you some crap that's wrong with it. Pretty low bar. Click the button, see what happens, fix the stuff that's wrong. That's a pretty good way to start.
There you go.
Nice. All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much. I do have one more question for you. What's the best way for everyone here to connect with you once you leave the GatsbyConf stage?
Oh, that'll be sad.
I know.
Yeah, no, like I'm like medium active on Twitter, and it's my name, Chris Coyier. So that'd be the place. But I use that everywhere. That's my CodePen name. That's my personal website. It's my email address at gmail.com. So
Awesome.
to whoever at any time. Thanks for having me too.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Awesome. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I was watching the chat as well. It looks like people were having a good time in there and lots of gifts, like very into that. So please keep those coming. One more thing before I pass it back to JD. We do want to take a minute to acknowledge what's going on right now in Ukraine. We know it's on everybody's mind, and we want to acknowledge that. We're appalled to see what's unfolding in the country, and we, as a team, myself, just everyone, we send our heartfelt condolences to everyone who's affected, and that's directly or indirectly. We know there's a lot of people that have family, friends, colleagues there who are, going through a lot right now. So we wanted to definitely address that today. Also today, we'll be sharing a link on a slide of ways that you can help people that are in Ukraine right now. And we also want to say, if you're not in the right headspace today for our tech conference, we totally get it. We want you to take care of yourself. All the talks, all the workshops tomorrow will be available online for free by Friday. So you'll have access to those. And if you are sticking around today, we thank you. We hope that this serves as just a very small distraction to everything else going on. And yeah, we're grateful to have you here today and all of the time in the Gatsby community. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lacey. And while we at Gatsby have taken a stand on that important issue, we've also made the decision to carry on with the conference. And while maybe not as important as obviously some of the bigger issues facing our world, we do have some pretty cool things happening at Gatsby, and as Chris talked about, in the world of web development. And so with that, we want to share that stuff with you. And we want to spend these next couple days sharing that with you. So we're going to go ahead and keep the show moving. And up next is my friend, Dustin Shao, who's the Gatsby's VP of Engineering. He's going to be joining us next on the main stage. So what you want to do is head back over to the agenda. If you click agenda at the top of your screen, click on his session titled The Latest, Greatest, and Beyond, and we'll join you again in just a couple minutes, just a few minutes. We'll see you over there. Thanks,
see
everybody.
You soon. Thank you.